All right, hello everyone. My name is Brandon Bell, if we haven't met, and I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit more today about beatboxing and just how to do that, how to approach vocal percussion is another term for it too, how to make noises with your mouth. So we're going to have some fun today, and wanted to call out right up front that I have notes on the other side of my camera. So if my eyes are moving away from the camera, it's because of my notes. So I wish I could be with you all in person. I'm really excited just to have a little bit of time with you all, just to speak through vocal percussion, how to use that in a group setting, and how you can practice on your own. So before I jump into any tutorials, just wanted to share very quickly how I learned to beatbox or to do vocal percussion, just to give you some context. So as a child, I didn't learn from anyone. I just loved to imitate things as much as I could, whether that was cars or trucks or things that I heard on the radio, noises that I heard around my house. I always tried to imitate those things and had so much fun trying to record those things, play it back, and see if it sounded similar to that thing that I was trying to imitate. But when I was in eighth grade, I ended up performing at a talent show just for fun at my school. And when I was in high school, I made my own, CD, as we called them back then, my own album with a friend. And it was from there that I realized, okay, there might be more than just a hobby here. Maybe I could use this in a music format. And so from there, I continued to practice and progress to the point where I was able to do that full time with an a cappella group for 2.5 years as my job. So if someone says you can't make a living and do a job someday where you're making noises with your mouth, I am proof that you can do that, and it was so much fun. So that's how I started beatboxing, and it was just by trying to imitate things as I grew up. But as I got older, how did I improve? That's something I wanted to talk through as well. So practicing, of course, it's something you can bring with you everywhere. I would do it in the car, much to the chagrin of my parents. And of course, trying it out in the shower and just doing noises all the time. I would always try to practice. But the other thing that I would try to do is not just percussion. So I would join choir and try to imitate different vocal sounds and tones. I ended up picking up drums and guitar. And so I encourage people to try a lot of different things and then see if you can interpret that through your mouth as well. And trying all of those different things, like being in choir and trying instruments, that actually made me a better vocal percussionist as well. So I view vocal percussion as just one sort of instrument, right? And everything else, it kind of adds to that and helped me become a better vocal percussionist. But the last thing I wanted to impress upon each of you is to become an obsessive listener. So I always start and stop music because I want to go back and hear what was that tone or what was that sound that was used there, and then try to interpret that through my mouth. And I would stop and rewind, and I still do to this day. I stop and rewind music constantly to try to listen for what was that sound? How could I potentially make that with my mouth? So all of that introduction up front, the one thing I want to make sure that each of you take away from this introduction to beatbox video, introduction to vocal percussion, is that we all have different mouths and vocal ranges, okay? So that means we aren't going to sound the same. And my voice and my range has also changed over time. And I remember when YouTube began to get really popular, people would send me videos of other people doing really incredible things. And they're like, you should try to do that. And then I realized my voice does not go that high, or I can't make that sound because my mouth is completely different from that person's. So once you realize that we're all created differently, this is a skill that you can develop for your own mouth. I think that should help take any pressure that you might be feeling to sound a certain way. So I think it's beautiful that we're all built differently, and we should be able to make different sounds. That's something that we should be able to celebrate. So try not to compare yourself next to the person sitting next to you. And it's all about trying to sound silly. So today, if you sound silly, if you feel like you're making a crazy noise, that means you're doing it right. This should be fun. So what I would recommend as we walk through a couple of ideas here to set it up, is get really good at 1, 2, maybe 3 sounds tops. That's my goal for today, is that you can learn 3 things that you can weave in and out and experiment with together. And then you might be able to build on that over time and do different versions of those things. But today I want us to focus on really the 3 primary noises that I would think through as I'm starting out in vocal percussion, and you can use those throughout any songs that you're trying to perform. So also, one more thing, please pause the video as you need to. I know that I think you're watching this during class right now, but after class, pause the video and try to practice. You can rewind and I can try to re-explain what we're trying to do. But that gives you time to practice, and then you can fast forward to the next section. So the first thing that we are going to talk through when we think about vocal percussion is breathing. And I think it's an important skill to learn because you have to be able to breathe while you're doing this. But I want you to practice before you make any noise with your mouth. We're just going to hum for a minute first. And so you can hum any key or any song if you want to, but so as I'm humming, you'll notice noise is coming out, air is moving through my nose. But where are those places where I can hum and then also breathe in? So notice I'm gonna show with my hand, I'm going out, and then I'm gonna show you when I'm breathing in as well. Then I have to take a breath. When I'm humming, all of that noise is coming out. When you're beatboxing, there's also noise that's typically moving out. So I want you to think through your breathing for a minute and how that's going to impact when we can and can't make sound. Because we have to think through, when do we make noises that are going out, and are there noises that we can make where we're breathing in as well? So we want to think through that, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the first noise I'm going to do is air coming out, which is the hi-hat. So the hi-hat is probably the most basic noise. I think it's something that you should all be able to do by the end of class. But it's really as simple as putting your tongue behind your teeth, and you're pushing your tongue against those teeth to push air out, and it's going like a snake, but my tongue is not actually going through my teeth. See, when I'm smiling, I'm just pushing my tongue against the back of my teeth and pushing air through, so it's kind of like that sprinkler noise. That idea. So that is as simple as a hi-hat can be, but notice that's air and movement out of my mouth. That is noise and air exiting my mouth. But notice if you start changing the shape of your mouth, or even where you put your tongue on the back of your teeth, that can start to change the tone of the hi-hat a little bit. So let's experiment with that for a second. So now I'm blowing air through my teeth. And if I use my tongue to cut that off, that's another form of hi-hat. But it's that simple idea of your tongue is not going past your teeth, you're pushing air through your teeth. And as you change the shape of your mouth, that might change the sound of the hi-hat a little bit as well. And like I said, our mouths are all a little bit different. It might sound different than your neighbor. That's okay. You can even try opening your teeth a little bit and just have fun with that sound for a minute. and try to practice some rhythm with that. So this would be a good place to pause, but trying to go. So once you get that down, the next noise that we want to do is the kick drum. So the kick drum, I've always done that, and that's the floor drum when you think about the drum set, but that's the noise that it has some depth and some bass to it. And I have always found the best way to do that sound and to imitate the kick drum is through the corner of your mouth. So you're gonna try to move as much air as you possibly can to this corner. I tend to do the right side of my mouth. I don't know if there's a right side and a left side of your mouth. I'm ambidextrous, I guess, with mouth noises. But when you try to do that kick drum, it's almost like you're making that kissing sound where you're going, and all that air, it sounds silly, that's on purpose, is coming through the corner. So try to move the air all to this corner. And it's gonna sound silly at first, but once you start pulling your lips back a little bit, and then just try to compress the air and just send out a little bit of air at a time, you're using your lips to be the gate to hold some of that air back. That's how you can get that percussive sound. So it's still that thing that we were doing up front that sounded silly. It's really, the lips are bouncing off of each other, but it's the air that's escaping that is allowing it to be more percussive. So I'm cutting the airflow off to make it sound like a drum. All out of the corner of my mouth. So if that's tough, another way you could do a kick drum that I've heard with a lot of groups like Pentatonics and other a cappella groups is you could try to do kind of like a thud sound with your mouth. Duh, 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 duh. Almost like you're saying duh, but more of like a thud. And I could put a hi-hat over the top of that to make it sound more percussive. But I would recommend you try to practice pushing air through that corner of your mouth. It's going to sound silly, but the more you practice, it can get much more impactful. So then when you start layering both of those things together, we're going to do the hi-hat and now the kick drum at the same time. That's where you can start to pretend a couple of different things, and this would play really well into the song that you're working on. And so once you practice that a little bit, you could even try making it sound different, where you're doing more than one hi-hat. So you can start having some fun with that. But where it gets really unique is when we think about the snare drum. So we have the floor drum, the kick drum, we have the hi-hat. I'd say the two most important things that we want to work on. The next noise that we want to work on is the snare drum. So the snare, very similar to the kick drum. The kick drum, I'm sending the air to the corner of my mouth. The snare drum, we're moving to the center. And sometimes I let air out of both corners. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. You're really just trying to find a different tone because that kick drum is really low and impactful, so has more depth. But with the snare drum, you want to try to create a higher pitch sound, and sometimes that means more air is escaping. And so now as I'm doing it, it's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's exiting both corners of my mouth. So I'm almost tucking in my lip, and I'm letting a lot of saliva actually leave my mouth to make it more percussive. So I'm trying to slow it down for you, where if you're going for the kick drum, it's almost like that sound of a balloon when you're pulling it apart. when you start to compact it and cut off some of that air, you'll notice I'm doing a s sound at the end as well. So this might be a chance to pause it, find some space in the room. I don't want anybody spitting on their partner, but this is a good way to start practicing that. So breaking it down to those 3 steps per minute, we have the hi-hat, which is, then we have the kick drum out of the corner. Then we have the snare, which is coming right kind of out of the middle, but it's really coming out of both corners of my mouth. And I'm letting more air go out. And there's some saliva that's coming out as well to make it sound like there's a little bit of a rattle. If you've ever played the drums, you have that chain that you kind of tie up to give it the rattle on the snare. So when we work those together, it could sound like this, and I'll do something very simple. It's the Boots and Cats idea, right? I think we've all heard that. Okay, so that's a really good segue into, notice how I just did an inhale noise. How do you keep going when all of that sound, those 3 noises that we just practiced, that's all air leaving my mouth. That is breath leaving my lungs. How do I get air back in so I can keep going? So I try to work in percussive breathing sometimes. And that's this idea of trying to find a way to breathe in on rhythm and even making noise when you're doing it. So here, I'll try to call out when I'm breathing, and you can hear the noise that I'm making when I breathe in. And it's more of a choral sound than percussive, but here, I'll show you. I'm gonna take a deep breath and then let those noises exit, and then I'll be breathing in as well. So it's that idea of, you can make a little bit of noise as you close your mouth and bring that into the beat. Something like that, where I'm cutting off my lips and it's cutting off the airflow, but and you can breathe in quickly, or you don't even have to make a noise if you don't want to. Let's practice that for a second. So you can, it's something that's going to take practice. We're not going to learn this in 30 minutes together. So I want you to think through how you can work those breaths in on beat, on rhythm. It will take practice. I've learned to do it in a way that's percussive as well. But the other way that I've done that, the last and final noise that I wanted to work through for just the basics, is that rim shot sound. And this is probably the hardest one to teach, but it's the idea where you have the drumstick on the side of the snare and you're cracking it down on the edge of the snare. And so it's in the very corners of my mouth. And it's where I'm kind of sucking in, like, it sounds silly when I try to break it down. And it's all in the very back, even behind my teeth, in the corners of my mouth. But it's air that I can move to one corner of my mouth or the other, or both. So I typically work through the right side, and it's like I'm sucking in. This is the hardest one to teach. But it's just like, if you hear, this is gonna sound silly, but when you've heard people riding a horse and they're trying to get the horse to move, they're like, let's go. It's that idea of that noise in the back of your mouth. That's the rim shot noise. But the primary thing that I think of with the rim shot noise that's really important, it's sucking in. You're bringing air in to your lungs. So you're actually breathing in when you're doing the rim shot noise, because you have to inhale to make that sound. You're creating that sucking motion, and it's moving that air in the corner of my mouth. So when I work that into a rhythm, I don't have to stop breathing. So that's the rim shot, and I'm sucking in every time. So that's giving me a lot of air coming back in. But the other thing, there's a lot to consider here. We talked very shortly about breathing at the very beginning, but that's something that you can find yourself doing as you're beatboxing. And the best way to describe it is, as you're practicing, try making some of these noises and humming and breathing. And I'm going to show you what I mean, and then we're going to unpack that. So this is called circular breathing. It's going to take practice, guys, so don't put too much pressure on yourself for the first time here. But with circular breathing, it's this idea of breathing through my nose and then finding a way to make noises where I can keep breathing. And the best way to describe that is, people have asked me, how many noises can you make at one time? The secret to that question is I can only do two things at once, and that's humming while I'm doing something and then making the noises that we've already practiced. I can't do any more than that. The rest of that is all just layering and doing it at a speed where it sounds like I'm doing maybe more than I actually am. That's the part that it's going to take practice as well. So circular breathing is this idea of breathing in and out of my nose, and I'm just going to give an example for a second. So I'm humming and doing the rim shot at the same time. And I'm also sucking in, notice, for my floor drum, my kick drum. So there's ways that you can keep breathing, and I try to do it through my nose, but when you think about how to breathe and layer sounds together, it's all going to just take practice. And so I'm trying to give you different concepts here that you can start to work through. But when you pull it all together, it could sound something like this. So I'm going to use all the noises that we just talked about, and I'm going to layer them in a different way that makes it sound like I'm doing more than I actually am. And notice my breathing as well. I want you to take note of when I'm sucking in air, maybe when I'm doing noises that I'm pulling in versus like exiting my mouth. So let's do that for a second. Okay, that's just one example. But again, hi-hat, kick drum, snare drum, rim shot. As I said up front, focus on one of those to start and maybe adopt 2 or 3 of those and start to layer those things together. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It might sound different to you than versus your neighbor, and that's okay. This is something that's going to take practice. But just for fun, the last thing I wanted to talk through very briefly is maybe some fun sounds that I've learned that I've tried to incorporate as well. Probably not as applicable to the song that you're thinking about. But the cowbell, that's where you're kind of making this, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's on the roof of your mouth where almost like my tongue is getting stuck. You're making the clock sound. But if you pull your tongue even further back, and notice I'm moving my mouth in different shapes and sizes here, that can change the depth of that as well. And then when you work that into some of the other noises that we were practicing, it can sound really cool. That's the next lesson. I'm just kidding. But you can start to play with different sounds and then try to work that in with some of the basic ones that we did. And cymbal crashes, those are really fun too. And that's where you get to kind of make that noise. But you're just thinking through pushing air through. That's a really long hi-hat sound that I'm just extending my tongue, pushing air through. And I like to visualize it sometimes when I'm doing it and practicing, just to make it feel more real. But if I had a microphone, I'm looking here, I might just grab a pen as an example. We're going to pretend this is a microphone, as funny as this may be. But another thing you can practice is moving your microphone in front of your mouth, and you can get different noises that way. So notice when I'm blowing out, that makes noise. The same thing happens when you're using a microphone. It would be like, and like I said, the key to vocal percussion is making sure that you're having fun with it. It should sound silly. And even to the point where I've tried to practice doing things like stopping the airflow with my mouth, with my hand when I'm talking, because that can create different sounds and ideas as well. So you can do some really different sounds when you're doing that, or moving the microphone like this when you're blowing on it. And it goes when you're going back and forth with it. So I just encourage you to try different things, have fun with it. This is meant to be an introduction, not an end-all be-all. So I hope this at least gave you some ideas. Practice that hi-hat, that kick drum, and that snare drum especially. The rim shot, that's a harder one to develop, but it's definitely worth trying to experiment with and practicing, because that's going to help you learn how to breathe differently and work these things into rhythm. But I think the song that Tim picked for all of you is perfect for vocal percussion, because it gives you a lot of room to breathe, literally, and to come up and try some different things. So that's going to be part 2. We're going to listen to that song and try to apply some of the things that we just talked through. But I hope that was helpful. Hopefully next time I can be with you all, and best of luck.